is Totally 80s, the podcast dedicated to the music of the greatest decade ever. So, turn up your Walkman, loosen that scrunchie, and get ready to talk 80s with your host, Lyndsey Parker.
Hello, I'm Lyndsey Parker from Yahoo Entertainment and SiriusXM Volume. Welcome to another episode of Totally 80s. We love hearing from you, so why not take a second to follow us at Totally 80s on Facebook and Instagram, or email us your comments and show ideas to podcast@totally80s.com. And just a reminder, if you want to see our faces, you can also catch this episode on video on our Totally 80s YouTube channel, so go check that out. And joining me today is my partner in all things 80s, the Difford to my Tilbrook, the Hall to my Oates, John Hughes.
Lyndsey Parker, you're precious to me.
You know what I like about you?
What?
That we can talk about power pop forever.
Exactly.
Especially when we bring on our special guest today. Joining us again is a musician, songwriter, journalist, and author who has written biographies for Bare Naked Ladies, Todd Rundgren, and a personal favorite of John's, The Kids in the Hall, One Dumb Guy. He also hosts the Record Store Day podcast, where he's welcomed such folks as Sparks, Fred Armisen, Questlove, Matthew Sweet, and many more. And he, alongside S.W. Lawden, quite literally co-edited and co-wrote 2 books on power pop titled Go All the Way, A Literary Appreciation of Power Pop, and its well-deserved and much-needed sequel, because there was more to talk about, Go Further, More Literary Appreciations of Power Pop. And now there's more verbal appreciations of power pop, because welcome back for part 2 of our Power Pop of the 80s podcast. We are happy to welcome back Paul Myers.
Great. I've missed you all.
Hey.
Well, let's talk about a few other songs that, again, every song is up for debate. How do we feel about Turning Japanese by the Vapors? I feel that's a power pop song.
Yeah, I mean, politically, it's a hard one to
Again,
go back to.
much like the Knack, did not age well lyrically.
Yeah.
This did come out in like 1980, 81. Let's put it in perspective.
I think it's almost an XTC song. I mean, like musically, and a bit like the Jam. Actually, the Jam had a lot of power pop songs too. That I don't know if Weller agrees with me, but there's that like I got you a picture. Very much. You can imagine Paul Weller singing that song. I mean, and I don't know what the motives for that band were. I don't know if it was a cash in for them to write a very knockoffy record, but it definitely, I don't know how long term their career was, but that moment
they continued for a while. I mean, John probably knows more than I do, but I don't think they only had one single or one album.
They had a few successful singles in the UK. Jimmy is a single.
Oh, that's them. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and they reunited. They have a new record out, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah. So
I stand corrected.
Yeah, they're
same.
You mentioned the Jam, because I think you're right. Start for sure as a power pop.
Yeah.
I mean, a Town Called Malice, maybe it may be more Motown-y, but
yeah.
But they definitely have some power pop in them. And XTC, early XTC.
We got to talk about XTC. We've sort of been teasing them for a while. But I mean, when you talk about like one of the greatest power pop bands and one of the most prolific, but also, as you mentioned a while ago, Paul, changed from record to record, did not stick to one thing, unlike the Knack.
To go to Skylarking with our buddy Todd producing, so we're going to have a lot of Todd in this podcast. It was weird. They picked Grass as the single when there's a perfect power pop ready-made song, Earn Enough for Us.
Yeah, Earn Enough for Us. I was dying to scream it out. Yeah.
Why?
No, I mean, that is, I'm Prairie Prince is on that from the Tubes. So it's like, it's such a great big hook. And a couple of the other songs could have been kind of power poppy on that one, but definitely that one.
You're really super girl.
That's really super. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. Utopia, Cry Baby. I think one of the great lost power pop singles. I remember the video on MTV a lot, but boy.
I remember Feet Don't Fail Me Now, where they were like dressed as caterpillars. That was the best video ever.
But to go back to Cry Baby though, this brings, we had missed it earlier. We kind of skipped over Next Position Please, I think. I just want to say, I honestly think that I Can't Take It is one of the greatest power pop songs ever, and that's from Next Position Please. And then Todd contributes. Cry Baby is the song that Utopia did. There's a version of that has become a song called Heaven's Falling. And Heaven, if you compare them, they're very similar. I feel like Todd wrote them in the same day. Todd Rundgren writes Heaven's Falling and gives it to Cheap Trick, who go all the way with the Toddism on that. And Heaven's Falling is a great power pop song, and they also covered the Motors on that record. But,
right.
but yeah.
Well, since we're on the whole subject of Todd, producing things and obviously having a hand in so many other great power pop records that were not his own, how much time do you guys have to talk about The Pursuit of Happiness, the most underrated band of all time?
I've got the whole day.
Love them. I love them so much. I was obsessed with them in 1989 when Love Junk came out. I don't think I listened to anything else for months. And actually, I have interviewed Todd once in my life. And this wasn't part of the interview, but as we were sitting down and kind of getting acquainted, I was trying to break the ice. I said, "Oh, you produced one of my favorite albums of all time." And he goes, "Oh, what? New York Dolls or, Bat Out of Hell?" And I'm like, "No, The Pursuit of Happiness." And he seemed real pleased that I told him that. And I think that record is perfect. I think actually a problem with that is they led with the single I'm an Adult Now, which did get some MTV play. It was kind of a 120-minute staple, but it was, in my opinion, the weakest song on the record because it was like a novelty song. Like, it's mostly talked and it's very snarky, and it definitely did not represent how tuneful Moberg is as a songwriter or what a great lyricist he is. I mean, Man's Best Friend is like a perfect song. So
She's So Young is a great power pop song. I will say this, full disclosure, Moberg is a personal friend of mine, and actually
cool. Tell him I say hello and that he's a genius. Tell him I love him.
I want to tell you a little story. When I was in the Toronto music scene as a musician, at a band called the Gravelberries, and we were on the scene, and then someone said, "You got to come check out this band that just moved to Toronto from Edmonton," and it was The Pursuit of Happiness. And I went to see them at this small club called the Rivoli, which Kids in the Hall fans will recognize the name because that's where the Kids in the Hall also started, a little club. And I walk in, and their PA tape that they were playing before they went on had like Big Star on it and the Raspberries and all these things. I went, okay, I'm already loving this band because they had a Todd Rundgren song on there. I was like, okay, whatever this band is, I know this is their music that they've put on before them to set the room. And they come out and they play She's So Young and Hard to Laugh and all these songs, Man's Best Friend, and I just immediately kind of glommed onto them. Actually, funny story. They were friends with with one of my roommates, and I didn't know it. I come home like kind of like drunk still, and I'm in my kitchen because it was a shared house with a bunch of people. And I'm in my kitchen, and The Pursuit of Happiness, who I just discovered that night, are sitting in my kitchen.
That's so cool.
They'd hung out with my friend after the show, and I said, "Oh, guys, I loved your band." And then we became friends, and then I would open for them at gigs, and I would feel like even though they were the same age as me, I felt like, okay, they are ahead of me for some reason. Mo and the band were super nice people. And Mo taught me how to play She's So Young chord for chord in the dressing room. And It's always been one of those stories that I love. And, and Mo and I still, chat every so often. I don't see him because I don't live in Toronto, but he's one of my favorite power pop songwriters, and he's a huge Todd head, obviously. And that's why Love Junk and the follow-up One-Sided Story have such a Todd thing, because it was Mo was already writing those songs that way. He didn't need to be told by Todd Rundgren how to write a song because he'd already learned it, And so when you mention The Pursuit of Happiness to me, I'm really proud of them because they're technically from Toronto now, but they're an actual Edmonton band originally. But
are they? Forgive my ignorance. Are they bigger, or were they bigger in Canada than they were in America? Because like I said, in America, there was like a little bit of fanfare around I'm an Adult Now, a little bit of MTV play. They went on a big tour of the US with Duran Duran that year, which was an interesting bill to put them on. But I guess at the time it kind of made sense. And I remember them going over very well with the Duran Duran audience when they did that tour. It would have been, I guess, when Big Thing was coming out.
Tour. I saw that tour.
Yeah. But were The Pursuit of Happiness bigger in Canada?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to say. I think they were embraced by Canada's MTV, which was called Much Music, which still is called Much Music, I think. And they were on high rotation on alternative radio and some pop rock radio. And they had a string of songs that were great. They actually went and did another album with a guy named Ed Stasium, who was like a big producer.
Yep.
And they they recorded that during the LA riots after Rodney King. And because they were in LA, and I remember hearing that. And they had like several big songs. And then they actually did some indie records that were really amazing. Some amazing songs that just like have big hooks. And they had that thing where the driving bass and drums was pretty much always almost eighth notes, and then big chords, but those, I don't know what to call them, suspension chords, and then ooh-ah harmonies. That was those two women vocalists would always define the harmonies, which gave it a took away some of the masculine sting of the crunchy guitar chords. And so there was always this almost post Joni Mitchell, Todd Rundgren thing happening on top of it. And if I'm going a little deep on the analogies here, stop me.
It's quite all right. I was, I made it very clear. I was quite happy to talk about The Pursuit of Happiness as long as you want to, because I talk about that band. I tell people about that band all the time. But I am wondering if you agree with me that at least in this country, in America, in the United States, that it was not a great idea to have I'm an Adult Now be the first single, because it was kind of a jokey, snarky song that maybe would make people like, it would make them seem like, a frat rock band. It was in my opinion, it was a misleading first single.
If I may, I think what happened was it was kind of a novelty, let's call it. And in Canada, it was their first indie single that had gone they got their own video added to Canadian Much Music.
Oh, wow.
They got it added without any major label, and they were being played on this video they made right out on Queen Street. And then they got signed to Chrysalis, which was a huge thing. I remember them getting signed to Chrysalis Records and then saying, our producer of choice is Todd Rundgren, and Todd Rundgren saying, yeah, I'll do that. And then we were like, I can't believe this little band suddenly did. So it felt like the right thing to do was to repeat the success. Yeah. But they always had the other songs in the chamber. But I guess what happens is it could either be the smartest thing in the world. It's the same thing with opening with a cover. Yeah. If you open with a cover and it's a catchy cover, it's still a gamble, because people might like the song but not ultimately buy the band. But it might also open doors for you that lets the next album go through. I think that it's a calculated thing that, in your opinion, and I kind of agree in hindsight, maybe, I don't know if She's So Young would have cleared the bases, as they say in the record business. I don't know if any of those songs would have found, maybe they needed some novelty, because you're also selling coals to Newcastle. If you're a Canadian rock band and you're going down to the big bad US market, we got them. We got, there's a million bands. There's, Letters to Cleo. There's a million bands that are out in America already. Why do they need another one? You mentioned
Letters to Cleo, because this seems to be yet another thing with this genre that strikes people. Letters to Cleo had Here and Now, which is borderline novelty with that chorus. Not a Surf with Popular.
Could there be a more? I mean, I know they're not an 80s band. This isn't. We're talking. That's like 90s. But could there be a more? Could there be a more misleading first single for Not a Surf than Popular? I mean, Matthew from Not a Surf is one of the most beautiful songwriters, and it was just again, a jokey song that was mostly talked, mostly spoken.
I wouldn't say jokey, but I know what you mean.
Well, the video made it jokey, if you remember the video on MTV.
Wayne, Stacy's mom. I mean,
that's a good example as well.
It's sad, because you can even go back to Radiation Vibe if you want. Even Chris would say that's a bit of a novelty song, but it seems to be a recurring theme with this genre.
Well, since we were talking a lot just now about a band from Canada, which is where Paul's from, let's take it to LA, which is where I'm from, because that was in the 80s, a fruitful place for power pop. We definitely talked about three of the bands, I guess, that were very successful from the 80s LA scene, which were the Go-Go's, the Bangles, and the Plimsouls. The Go-Go's, obviously, as you mentioned, Paul, came out of a punk scene and then popified over time. How much time do you have to talk about Red Cross?
Oh,
because I got all day. I got all day.
I will say this, and if Jeff McDonald's listening, I didn't catch them the first time when they first started making records. I was like, well, what is that? What is that? But all my power pop friends were telling me, they would say, Enough's Enough and Red Cross. You should both check those bands out.
Enough's Enough. That is a good one you bring up, because they were a power pop band in the 80s dressed in heavy metal.
Marketed as a poodle band. Yeah, absolutely.
I would say Rat was too, if you really want to go down that road.
Well, Round and Round is a great pop song.
Perfect song.
Absolutely.
Perfect song.
But and Poison had a few of them too. But
Talk Dirty to me is a power pop song in my opinion, because it's basically She's Tight, so there you go. Anyway, go on.
There's a few Motley Crue songs that might have also, Kickstart My Heart could have been, if you toned down the guitars a little bit, it could have actually been a.
But back to Red Cross, because they started as a hardcore band, but then became
and that's what it is. So when I finally started hearing the pop part in them, I went, oh yeah, these guys. In fact, I sort of can't believe I haven't had them on my Record Store Day podcast yet. Maybe I've made a mistake and I need to send them out an invitation again. But now that you mention
Steve, if you're listening to this, hit up Paul, please. Get in his DMs, at him, please.
I got
Jeff's in my social media, so if you're out there, Jeff, please.
I came up to Red Cross a really weird way. I believe 120 Minutes played Annie's song like maybe once or twice.
Annie's Gone, but that's actually 1990. That was from Third Eye, and that's a great song. But being someone who is from LA, like I said, they started off as a hardcore band. They sounded like Black Flag or something. They were real young, but it was 1987, I believe, when Neurotica came out. Which was when suddenly they became this amazing, Peach Kelly pop songs like That Love Is You. They became a full on like Partridge Family style power band. And I became absolutely obsessed with them. And then they stayed down that path with, in the 90s with Third Eye and Annie's Gone, as you mentioned, John. And of course, the Spirit of 76 movie and soundtrack. And I mean, Phase Shifter, probably one of my top 5 albums of the 90s.
I came into them way late, and it's funny because Paul mentioned Much Music. I was living in Cleveland, and we had Much Music in Cleveland. For some reason, they jumped on the video for Mess Around, and they played that a lot. And I got Show World, and then I went back and got Phase Shifter, and I get Third Eye as a cutout for $1.99 back then. So I picked that up, and it's not the 80s era, but they're definitely up there when it comes to
it was 87 when the Neurotica album came out that they started to shift from being a just very, very abrasive punk band to being a very kind of jangly Paisley Underground adjacent band, and absolutely amazing songwriters. And being that I'm from LA, I, for a very long time, had a very distorted idea of how big they were, much like, these bands are bigger than Red Cross, but much like Oingo Boingo or X, I just thought they were like the biggest band in the world, because Red Cross, when they would play LA, they would sell out a pretty good sized venue. There would be a line around the block from very, very hometown heroes. But I think, along with the Pursuit of Happiness, they are absolutely, it's a recurring theme on this episode of, underrated bands, unsung bands. But since I mentioned Paisley Underground, we've talked a little bit about that with the Bangles, who, I was about to say arguably, but not arguably, are the biggest band that came out of that scene. The Paisley Underground thing was definitely power pop adjacent. That was a very LA thing. The 3 o'clock is a really good example.
Great example.
Let's talk a little bit about like the power pop Paisley Underground convergence.
Well, John, you could go first, I guess.
I brought him up last episode. I got to bring him up again. The Lucy Show came out of that Paisley Underground. People don't know about them, but they are just an amazing power pop combo from Detroit. I think they had the mistake of being on a really shifty label back then, Big Time Records, that was notorious for some not so good practices. Don't sue me, but they had these dark videos. Their videos and their image did not match their music. They were actually a power pop band in goth drag, I think.
It's kind of like they're sort of like the goth Enough's Enough, where the outside the book does not match the cover.
Yeah. Exactly. There's this thread in LA power pop and I kind of wrote about it in the second book. My essay in Go Further is actually about the contemporary LA scene, but I actually trace it back to Emmett Rhodes. And then if you also look at, I'm just going to play a few games here. So Jason Faulkner of Jellyfish and later of the Grays was I think he was in one version of the 3 o'clock.
He was, and he was on the last album, and he was on that they did a cover of I don't know if it was a cover, but they did a song that Prince wrote called Neon Telephone, I believe.
That's right.
Amazing. Yeah. And we talked about that on our Prince Protege podcast. Amazing song. And wait? I just want to interject real quick that Jason Faulkner was in the 3 o'clock. He was in the Grays. He was in Jellyfish. He plays in Beck's band now. And he was in Community FK, the goth band. His resume is very diverse. We could do a whole podcast just on him.
He did a record with R. Stevie Moore as well, which is a very out there thing.
But yeah, he's definitely a hero.
Wonderful.
An LA hero of power pop for sure.
But the point I'm getting to is that so Susanna from the Bangles is one of those great, and actually all of the Bangles were great record collectors and record nerds, and they sought out Emmett to work with them early on, and they covered Live, and they were. So when I saw the Paisley reunion, that when they played the Paisley Underground reunion played the Fillmore here in San Francisco, and this is the same show that played in LA, and they had was it Dream Syndicate, and everybody was up there, and they all sang Live as the sort of like an encore song or a finale or something, and it really to me sold that idea that this through line went up through the 60s, 70s, 80s, and it continues now with, some of the people who played on Emmett Rhodes' final album, actually.
Chris Price.
And yeah, Chris Price, who produced it, and Jason Faulkner is on it, and Taylor Locke, who was in Rooney originally, and some of the other people that are around. Roger Joseph Manning is on that record from Jellyfish, so and also from Beck's band, and Susanna, and I think Amy Mann are on that record. So there's definitely a feeling to me, it's a continuum that sort of goes through. It goes through the Emmett studio, I guess.
Interesting. Well, there's one more obscure LA band I want to talk about. They're super obscure. I feel like you had to live in LA in 1986-ish, and no one remembers them, although they did begat Gilby Clarke, who later, of course, was in Guns N' Roses. Do you remember the band Candy? Whatever happened to Fun?
I remember the video.
Whatever happened to Fun?
Yeah,
they kind of looked a little bit, they kind of suffered from the same kind of Enough's Enough situation. Big hair, poodly look. That was a pure power pop record. Gilby Clarke was in the band.
Yeah, I remember. I do remember.
Who later of Kill for Thrills, and of course, Izzy's replacement. But do you remember this, or is this just me?
I don't. Here's the thing, and I'll probably have people yelling at me, but I don't remember Candy at all.
It was a one-time thing. I think they had it was an album again. Another one of those albums I saw in cutout bins. It
was actually a really good record. Do you know who Kyle Vincent is? Because Kyle Vincent was in the band. Okay,
I didn't know he was. I didn't know that's where he came from. Okay.
Kyle Vincent and Gilby Clarke were in the band together, and then Jeff Siegel, who later was in the Nymphs, who were not a power pop band, but were like a famous band in LA, and mostly famous because Inger Laurie pissed on a Geffen executive's desk, which is a whole sidebar we don't need to get into. But did I stump Paul Myers with some power pop knowledge?
I bet S.W. Lawden, my co-authors from the book, Steve Lawden, would have known them, because he's definitely of your LA vintage, if you will, or you're like he knows a lot of those bands that I didn't know, or he knows more about the bands that I did know a little about, So that's one of the reasons why he's a great co-curator with me, because we kind of reached out in two different directions, and I pulled in a certain kind of person, and we also chose who got to write about what, and based on their strengths and stuff like that. So definitely the LA history stuff seems to be S.W. Lawden's area on this thing.
Well, the reason besides the fact that I, obviously grew up in LA, they were getting played on K-Rock, which is the alternative rock radio station here. I'm sure Rodney was playing them, but there was an after school show. It was like a local video show called MV3, which I imagine, I think it might have only been a West Coast show, but I think John might have some knowledge of the show.
It was syndicated.
It was? Okay. Well, they used to play Whatever Happened to Fun. Yeah. Which ended up kind of like, as we've been saying, was prophetic. Nothing happened with them and they broke up. But they had a moment, and it's kind of funny because when I was at UCLA, we've talked, as I've mentioned on the College Rock Radio podcast we did with Annie Zaleski, the Jellyfish writer for your book. Annie was on, and we had a College Rock Radio thing. And we all talked about how we used to be, college radio DJs. And I used to do a show that was an 80s flashback show. And I remember I was playing Whatever Happened to Fun by Candy because I, of course, own the album, which I will admit, John, I do think I bought from a cutout bin. I do think I paid maybe $1 for it. $1 very well spent. Yeah. Money well spent. And I still have it.
Yeah, I got the Knack round trip for 99 cents.
You can get like kind of their whole discography for like $5. But anyway, I had this one Candy record. I played Whatever Happened to Fun, and the switchboard, or the hotline lit up, and it was Kyle Vincent calling me. And he said, "Oh, my friend just called me and said you were playing Candy on your show." He goes, "Is today failed bands day at KLA?" Oh, no. He didn't say it in a bitchy or a rude or bitter way. He said it like he was making a joke, but he was amused or bemused. He was like, "Why are you playing this? Like, how do you know about this?" So yeah, it was very obscure, but I think anyone should. And they only had, I guess they had. Oh, this is interesting. I just happened to look up their discography. So they had a record in 1985. It was called Whatever Happened to Fun. It was on Mercury Polygram. But according to Wikipedia, they had an album called Teenage Neon Jungle, Rare and Unreleased, 2003. So they did apparently have some other songs in the can, but you know,
Right.
like many power pop bands, it was not meant to be. But at least, you know, Gilby Clarke went on to do big things with his life.
Well, one of the things I love about these conversations is that I will always come away with something to look up later. And I long ago gave up the idea that I would know everything. You know,
You can't know everything. You can't
and that's
know
the
everything.
fun of it. Is like, you know, I think there's that thing. One of the things I hate about the internet is, you know, I write about Todd Rundgren and I write about power pop, and there's this idea that they're going to gun for you. You didn't know that? And once you give over, there's a Zen thing of letting go and going, yes, you know, I'm here to learn. Yeah. I'm here to learn all about what you're telling me.
For sure.
Well, why don't we educate each other before? There's definitely like a handful of bands I haven't gone to on my list that actually were very successful that we would be absolutely remiss if we didn't talk about, and we would get those kind of comments like, why didn't you talk about someone? But before we end on that happy note and pivot to those bands, educate me. What are, you know, I've volunteered. We've talked about some of the bands that should have been bigger that other people might not know about. What are some of your guys' picks in the power pop 80s genre?
I think, well, power pop 80s, I think we were very US centric, because I do think power pop is unfortunately or fortunately, a US centric genre in a lot of respects.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a big power pop movement in the UK near the end of the decade with, you guys might come at me, but the Laws.
Oh yeah, totally. The Laws. Was that the 80s? Yeah. I guess that was about the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah. I would even say Trash Can Sinatra's, maybe. Mm-hmm.
Were you going to say Boo Radley's by any chance?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Boo Radley's for sure. The Pooh Sticks.
I know I mean, it is totally 80s, but everything's blurring. I would actually say the 90s were a great time for British power pop, because I mean, the Boo Radleys are British, right? Are they British?
I think they are. Yeah.
Teenage Fan Club. Hello.
Teenage Fan Club.
Fan Club. Enough said. I could do a whole podcast about the brilliance of Teenage Fan Club.
I'm going to go there and say that first Oasis record.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely songs on there. I've actually come back to it recently. I was just in the UK for 3 months doing something, and there was a lot of Liam Gallagher on TV talking about the history of Oasis, and I kind of went, okay, I forgot. Yeah, they're great.
Yeah, it's those last few albums that turned us off, but definitely maybe,
What about Silver Sun? Do you remember that band?
Absolutely. I was going to mention them. They're Scottish, and he passed away recently, and I don't remember
last
his
year.
name. Yeah, but Golden Skin is one of the great power pop songs. I was actually turned on to them by Michael Chabon, the author who wrote in the first edition. Yeah, he's always doing that, and Guided by Voices is another one that I hadn't been sufficiently keen on the power pop aspect, and he would totally turn me on to it. So
it was James Broad, and he died just last November of 2020, and he absolutely, I mean, there are certain bands that I just get angry. I just want to stand on the edge of a cliff and just yell about how good they were and how they should have been bigger. And Silver Sun, again, a 90s band, but absolutely. So yeah, actually it's interesting because to your point, John, it seems like in the 70s and 80s, maybe the bands that were the bigger bands of power pop genre were American bands.
Yeah.
But of course in the 90s we had all this, but we have to talk about this.
If I'm going to put one out that I think everybody should go and listen to, it's not 80s, but it's close. In that UK power pop genre is the Candy Skins.
Okay, I liked them.
Really, really underrated, really good singles, really good stuff that I just think people forgot about.
Well, let's go back to the 80s and debunk our entire theory that the 80s was all about American power pop. Because I would say one of the biggest bands of the genre in the 80s who had success, and I can't believe it took us this long to talk about them, is Squeeze. Let's talk about Squeeze. Yeah. Now, it's kind of I don't remember which publication it was. It might have been Rolling Stone, but some major publication kind of early in their career basically said that Difford and Tilbrook were the new Lennon and McCartney, which of course you say that it's ultimately a curse. So it cursed them a little bit, but they had Black Coffee in Bed is one of my favorite songs of all time. Annie Get Your Gun, Pulling Muscles from Michelle. They had so many big songs. And I don't necessarily think that assessment in the moment it was written was totally wrong. I mean, they're one of the greatest pop songwriting teams I think there is. So let's talk about them for a second.
Well, Up the Junction is one of the great songs in general. And also a lot of their stuff like Slap and Tickle, you wouldn't think it was a power pop song because it probably isn't, but I mean, it definitely has the elements that I love about power pop, with also this added synthesizer madness courtesy of Jules Holland. But there's something about them. I mean, there's this pub rock thing, right? Pub rock kind of veers into, you know, Nick Lowe and Brinsley Schwartz and then Bram Tchaikovsky. You know, there's definitely the pub rock genesis of what became British power pop. I mean, and I'm sure much like here, maybe some of those pub rockers didn't like to be called power pop, you know, and I think that there's definitely, I see where you're going with this.
But God, I mean, they had just so many perfect songs, just perfect songs.
I'm a massive Squeeze fan to this day, actually. I'm pretty excited about whether or not this happens in North America. I mean, they're out here now. By the time they get to the Bay Area, I hope there's still a tour, but because things are always changing this year. Yeah. But you know, they're going, and they would go out with Hall & Oates, which is interesting because you would think
Hall & Oates occasionally were a power pop. I mean, You Make My Dreams Come True is a
Private Eyes. Private Eyes and Kiss on My List is a great.
Squeeze, isn't it weird that their biggest US hit was Hourglass? Again,
it wasn't Tempted. Which is not a power pop song, but I would have assumed it was Tempted, especially because it had a second life in Reality Bites in the 90s. It was Hourglass?
Tempted
to the bridge.
Tempted did not even make the top 40 here. It came close. I think it was like 45. But Hourglass again.
Wow.
A novelty song, and it's what their biggest hit here. And 8654347. That was the other hit.
Yeah, that was. I remember that being on like commercial television a lot.
8675309. Is that a power pop song by Tommy Two Tone?
Yeah.
Sure. Is Jesse's? Well, we haven't talked about Rick Springfield.
Power pop all the way.
Power pop all the way. Skinny Tie even on right there.
I've done Something for You, written by Sammy Hagar.
What?
Sammy Hagar's best work. That song.
I've Done Everything for You was written by Sammy Hagar.
I did not know that. You stumped me again. The middle of Jesse's Girl, when he goes into these harmonies, there's that middle section, and it reminds me of Todd Rundgren. There's like this big massive wall of like chordal harmonies that happens in there. Yeah, I always thought that if I ever sat down with Rick Springfield, like we'd get along. He probably has a lot of the same records I have. I don't know.
Absolutely. Well, going back to England for a second, I did want to branch out to England and also down under for a second. I have a feeling you guys will agree with me, but I'm just going to put it out there. I would say one of the most successful pure power pop bands of the 80s was the Outfield, who a lot of people don't realize were British, but because they kind of just seem American in their looks and their aesthetic. But I mean, Your Love, could there be a more perfect song? But people think of them as a one-hit wonder, but they weren't. They were like a 3-hit wonder.
All the Love in the World, and that other one.
Say It Isn't So. not the Hall & Oates Say It Isn't So, the Outfields. But I mean, Your Love became one of those songs that like was on like Laguna Beach or the OC or the Hills, and became one of these songs that like millennials and young people, they like kind of like Don't Stop Believin'. Like people would hear it at a club and somehow kids knew it. And it had like this Saturday Night Live skit about it, which was one of the best musical live sketches on Saturday Night Live ever. But that, I would say the Outfield were very pure power pop in their sound.
It sounds like Paul has a dissenting
opinion. There's this one thing that would just always irked me about Your Love was that when it came out, like he sang so much like Sting on that one.
Oh my God.
Wasn't his voice just like that? Didn't he just have a high voice?
I don't know, but I felt like it was a little bit like, you know, I don't want to lose. Like it just, and then also the harmonies were completely the Cars. Like, you know, I don't want to love.
Neither of these are minuses to me, though.
I know. But when I heard it, I remember thinking there was, the post new wave era for me was so great that there was such an originality. Every artist had their own thing. Like Susie and the Banshees, Christine the Strawberry Girl did not sound like XTC. You know, there was a lot of bands every week that had a new take on it. Even the early Cure. You know, Boys Don't Cry was such a, that's kind of a power pop song. Actually.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
I would say a lot of the stuff on Head on the Door as well, like In Between Days, Close to Me, even maybe, definitely In Between Days, so definitely Friday I'm in Love and songs like that.
The band had someone else's like signature at the front of it. I was kind of like quirked out by it a little bit. I don't know. I don't mean to be an asshole, you know.
No, you're not.
And Lyndsey, the problematic lyrics of Your Love. Sorry.
Well, I mean, this is a recurring thing. Can we just do like a podcast about problematic lyrics? It would be hours long. Every problematic lyric of like just the heavy metal genre alone, just like the Motley Crue and Poison songs, it would be a long podcast. We do have to take things in context. But let's go into, I said I wanted to do a little bit of Down Under stuff. Is Split Enz a power pop band?
Yes. By the time Neil Finn took over,
Yes.
by the time Neil Finn wrote I Got You, and then I guess was
6 months in a leaky boat.
But the other I See Red.
I See Red.
You know, and 6 months in a leaky boat was definitely in that realm. But I think I Got You was definitely more. Oh, What's the Matter with You?
History Never Repeats.
History
Never Repeats, which actually has that. Goes all the way back to the Pete Townsend-y thing we were talking about. That element of the outro of History Never Repeats could have been like a Who song. It was like such a great, I mean, the power pop end of the Who. And no. And I'm a huge Neil Finn fan to this day because of the impression he made with, you know, can I just tell you a little braggy story?
Please, I have all the time in the world for any talk about Neil Finn. I think he's a god.
So when I had him on the show finally, years and years ago, I was in Toronto, and I'll make the short version. So Split Enz had broken up, and I saw in a record store the Crowded House first album, and it was someone had written in pencil on it, a wax pencil, "This is the guy from Split Enz." So I knew Crowded House. So I bought it immediately.
That's very helpful. What a great great little note for you.
Sunrise Records in Toronto, and I think I eventually met the guy who wrote it. It was a guy named Dave, but. And on that same day, I bought the World Party first album, but we'll talk about that another time. But so I think, I gotta go see Crowded House, but they were opening for Bruce Hornsby and the Range at Massey Hall. Now, Bruce Hornsby had a late blooming success and wasn't used to touring a lot, and his throat went out halfway through the tour because remember he had a huge hit. Yeah. So Crowded House was supposed to open that show. They were in Toronto with no show, so they announced a spot show that they were doing at this place called the Diamond Club, which was, you know, a nice little venue. And I just went down. Oh yeah, this is great. It's even better because I get to just see Crowded House. Mm-hmm. And it was the original lineup, and they didn't have a full evening of material yet. So they played the album, and then they played a few, and then they were doing this thing where they were daring the audience. They said, you know, yell a song, we'll play it. And so somebody yelled 6 months in a leaky boat, and they
was it you?
No.
Was it you who yelled it?
No, but it gets better. It gets better. Okay. So this guy yells it, and then they go, well, you should come up and sing it to the guy. And the guy was, no offense to the guy if he's ever listening to this, but he wasn't very good. And he goes up there, and he's a little bit drunk, and he doesn't get it at all. And, you know, and then they thank him because they're good guys, and they pat him on the back and send him back down to the audience. So I yell out, I got you. And he goes, well, you have to come up and sing it. That's the rule. Luckily, I had covered this song and knew it. And I knew exactly where the trouble was for me in the higher part. So I got up there and I sang it and channeled the you know, I went, I got you. And I had the perfect inflection. And then Neil looked at me like, oh, he knows it. And then, but then I knew I couldn't do the, I don't know. So I waved him in like you do, like come in as the chorus is coming up. I got it. And then I did the thing that I've never had this clarity in my life before. I waved to the audience, thanked the band, and jumped back into the audience. Like
rock star move.
Quite stage dive, but I kind of like jumped down towards the audience. And then they said, hey, thank him. That was great. You know, and then afterwards I went up to him at the stage door or the side door. And I said, hi, that was really fun. Thanks a lot. And he was wearing an XTC t-shirt. And I thought, okay, now I'm in love with this guy. So
wow.
So then years later, I was a journalist and I was interviewing them, and I interviewed them again, and then I saw them again, and then so I've had this long relationship with Neil Finn that started on that day. And like, to me, to sing I Got You with, you know, Nick Seymour and Paul Hester, God bless him. And it was just, it's always, you know, if I have any war stories to tell, like the kids today, that really happened. That was an amazing story.
That is absolutely a great story. Well, we're almost out of time, but there is another Down Under band that I feel like we should at least pay some lip service to. That's the Huda Gurus, who are, I believe, supposed to tour America. Well, they were before the pandemic. We'll see, but hopefully they'll come back. But I mean, I imagine they had some success here, kind of 120 minutes. They actually sort of overlapped into like the college rock thing. But I mean, what great songwriting that
What's
band
My
had.
Scene was them, right?
What's My Scene is like the biggest.
And you know, I stole that in one of my own songs. I remember taking the chord progression from the verses, and then I wrote a different melody and a different lyric, but I remember loving that chord progression, and another thing I've been wondering lately, and I did another song where I had the same up chord pattern, and I remember telling everyone I stole it from the Huda Gurus, but yeah.
Bittersweet's a great single. Miss Free Love 69 is a great single. I want to, since we're down under, I want to give a shout out to New Zealand a little bit. The Swingers, One Good Reason. Do you guys know that song?
I don't know it.
And Split Ends are from New Zealand as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. There are others, and they would hate that if you said they were Australian.
Yeah. The other single,
Counting. So I make sure.
There's your homework, Counting the Beat, and One Good Reason by the Swingers. Actually,
don't know them at all. Don't know them at all.
Related to Split Ends. You'll see when and the bass player went on to be the bass player for Midnight Oil. So there you go.
Oh, there you go. Well, let's bring it back home with one last band here in the United States, because when we talk about sort of the archetype of the lyrics about, a lot of power pop lyrics being about like longing and unrequited love and this sort of thing, Smithereens. Got to talk about the Smithereens for a second.
Back to Ed Stasium.
Yes, exactly.
Really?
Which I think that's why The Pursuit of Happiness went with them on their Downward Spiral album. They used to cover A Girl Like You by the Smithereens, and I think I haven't talked to Mo about this specifically, but I'm pretty sure that's why Ed Stasium did the third Pursuit of Happiness record. So so Smithereens, A Girl Like You is one of the great songs. I mean, it's just, and of course Behind the Wall of Sleep, Blood and Roses, right?
Sure.
Yeah, it all comes to me. And that voice.
House that we used to live in. Like, did Pat write a single song that was about like love working out or being requited? I don't think he did. I really don't think he did.
No. And a power pop collaboration with the Smithereens and Belinda Carlisle on Blue Period.
Yeah.
Really? All right.
Yeah.
Also, Kate Pearson sings on A Girl Like You, right?
Yes.
That is right.
Yep. Also,
In a Lonely Place, Strangers When We Meet, Behind the Wall of Sleep, Only a Memory of how could every house that we used to live in, Drown in My Own Tears, Girl Like You, Yesterday Girl, like Tell Me When Did Things Go Wrong? Girl. Like they had no songs that were about like we're in love and everything's great. Like it was all, but I think that is probably, and this is a good way to sort of end things with like, let's just talk in general about like the lyrical themes of power pop, like that sort of like kind of awkwardness of having a crush on someone who doesn't know you're alive or doesn't love you back, or like, that's kind of like the bread and butter of power pop, right? This, or like sexual frustration, frustrated, one-sided lust, all that. That's like kind of what, why is that like such an important element of power pop?
Well, I guess it comes back to what we're talking about. I mean, in my original definition of power pop, I had mentioned that it's always Friday night and there's always that person you wanted to see from school is at the mall. Well, the thing about those things is quite often those, and by the way, malls, how dated is that as a reference? But part of that is the unrequited love aspect of it, because you wouldn't, there's, even David Mamet would agree, there's no scene without the tension, and the tension being that you're just doomed to not really get, either you're not going to meet the girl or boy, and if you do, it's not going to work out. I mean, and that's a more exciting story than I met you, we got married, and everything's great. Which is my life, by the way. I just want to say, I met the girl of my dreams in 1986, and we haven't looked back. So,
congratulations.
And it's, I'm not bragging. I'm just saying, I could never write a song about my life unless I write a song about those fights that you have in a long-term relationship, and that's where some of the more mature songwriters do. But power pop isn't about growing up. Power pop isn't about mature attitudes about things. It's about idealism. It's about sort of, like I said, the eternal Friday night, and the immediacy of now and the celebration of the first time you felt something. And usually those things don't work out.
Aww. No, that's a very eloquent way of putting it.
The Knack had a B-side called Frustrated. There it is.
And we started with the Knack. We're ending with the Knack. We got the Knack.
Circle.
The Circle of Life, which is not a power pop song. So
no,
yes. Maybe someone could remake it as a power pop song. That's probably a bad idea. No one did that.
One thing I just want to say quickly: Silver Sun did a cover of Rush. Oh God, what was the song? And they
the band.
Yeah, and they made it into a power pop song. Oh, now I'm blanking. Someone's yelling at the speakers now. But they took was it Spirit of Radio or the anyway. They took a song by Rush and made it into power pop. And look it up, Silver Sun covering Rush.
Well,
it's so
my God, I mean, if you can do that, you are one of the best power pop bands ever. Then
they really were.
Well,
anyways.
I feel we'll just end it on that note, because it's always good to end the power pop or any podcast with sort of like giving our listeners like little notes about, the homework that they can do after the show. So thank you so much. A very special thanks to our guest today, Paul Myers. His books on power pop are available now on Amazon and even those physical bookstores. And make sure to listen and follow the Record Store Day podcast with Paul and his special guests. I've been Lyndsey Parker, and I've been joined today by John Hughes. And we want to thank you for listening. Remember to give us a rate and review on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll catch you next time.
This was Totally 80s, the podcast dedicated to the music of the greatest decade ever. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Totally 80s, and please leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Until our next episode, catch you on the flip side.